This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV, This Week in Virology, episode 827, recorded on November 5th, 2021. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon DePommier.
Hello, Vincent, and everybody else. Out my window, it is a cloudless, beautiful blue sky. Afternoon temperatures in the 50s. A typical fall day, and tomorrow we have to get used to getting up a little bit earlier. I think.
With clocks are changing, right?
Yeah, they are.
What is it? Fall back, right?
Fall back, spring forward.
All right.
Exactly.
Also joining us from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody. We have no clouds in our sky. It's light blue. It's 9 Celsius and 48 Fahrenheit. It won't be till Sunday morning that we have to adjust.
Sunday
morning.
morning.
That's right.
Saturday
It's like
night, Sunday morning.
2 a.m., yeah.
right.
From Austin, Texas, Rich Condit.
Hi, everybody. 63 degrees, which is cool for Austin, Texas. Partly cloudy. It's good.
We have a guest for you today who's not too far from me and Dixon over in New Jersey. He's author of A Shot to Save the World, the inside story of the life or death race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Greg Zuckerman, welcome to TWiV.
Hey, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a real honor.
Greg?
Yeah.
I should tell where I am. So I'm in Livingston, New Jersey. Again, not too far from you guys, and just as cloudless and sunny and pleasant as you guys are experiencing, not too far away.
It doesn't look like you are home.
I'm not. I'm in a friend's office. I've been working from home, and I can't today. Our new world, we're all adjusting and finding the best places. So I used to go in every day in New York City, where the Wall Street Journal's offices are. I've been in my basement in West Orange, New Jersey for much of the past year, and sometimes in Barnes & Noble Cafe and locally and elsewhere as well.
Okay.
So where was most of the book written? In Barnes & Noble?
It was all over. I was on the run. We were at home. I was at home in West Orange for a little while, at Barnes & Noble. My mother still has a place in Rhode Island. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and there's a place by the beach, and sometimes I would retreat there and do all-nighters by the water there. So it was an amalgam of places.
All right.
Did you get book leave to do this, or
I had 2 months of leave, partly my own decision and partly, I have other responsibilities. I write about other things. So I was juggling a lot. It was a lot of 3 a.m. Late nights, writing about your world and learning about it at the same time.
So at some point, Greg, are you going to go back to commuting to New York City?
Yeah, we're easing back into it. I'm doing it more or less once, maybe twice a week. I think that's for the foreseeable future of many of us, but we're easing back into it.
Okay.
The Wall Street Journal does not yet have a mandate for vaccines, to the frustration of some of us. So it's taken a little while for us to get back, but I think we will slowly but surely.
Well, when you do, you have to stop by to the incubator and check it out. It isn't right next to Wall Street, but it's easy to get here.
That'd be great.
All right, so let's start out with a little of your history. We learned that you grew up in Rhode Island, and what happened? Where'd you go to college, and what did you study?
Sure. Just before that, my father is a social scientist, political scientist. He passed away, but political science, head of the chairman of the department at Brown University for many years, and did some Judaic studies as well. So I interacted with academia my whole life, but on the social science side of things, and grew up in Providence, was not very good at science and math, and I ended up writing a number of books on science and math, and we can explore why. Besides me being something of a I like challenges, and this is a real challenge, and I get to learn. I went to Brandeis University, majored in political science with some economics, set out to go work on Wall Street in the investment world. I always was fascinated by companies and changes, and I remember seeing the back of a Skippy peanut butter and realizing that, wait, it's not Skippy Corporation. There's some company that actually owns Smucker's also, I think, at the time. And what those combinations and brands and how it all worked together sounded fascinating to me. Ended up falling into writing about business and investing. And that's my career's mostly been until the past few years. I wrote a book about it was geology and fracking. It's called The Frackers. And that started edging me back into the world of science a little bit. And then threw myself into this book and the remarkable world of biology and biotechnology and health, which I find endlessly just fascinating. And your world has just really captivated me. So I think maybe as an outsider, I appreciate it perhaps more than some who are on the inside, and we can talk about that a little bit.
What's your beat
I'd like
for
to
the Wall
ask-
Street Journal?
Oh, excuse me.
What's
Kathy,
my
go
beat?
ahead.
So I'm now an investigative reporter. So I do, I try to uncover things. Sometimes it's malfeasance, often in the business world, not only. So I've done a lot of stuff in the biotech world, which is the overlap with my book and with the vaccine chase. So over the years, but it's often sort of companies that maybe shouldn't be doing what they're doing kind of thing. And not only, but that's my experience. And I've dealt with a lot of hedge funds and investors, venture capital type firms, people that scrutinize the industry come at it from that vantage point. But I've covered all kinds of different areas of the world of finance, hedge funds, private equity firms, the bond market. And now I kind of roam and they let me investigate.
Nice.
I want to ask a question about motivation. When we had Carl Zimmer on a while ago, and I asked him this question, he kind of, I don't think, got it.
Let's hope I do.
Which may be the answer. Okay, I hate writing. Okay, I'm okay at it when I have to do it, but I hate it, and so I always wonder what motivates people to do it.
So I love telling a story. If you go back, thousands of years around this campfire, that's sort of what we've been doing as a people, as a mankind, humankind. I like telling stories. I like entertaining, and I like informing. I like telling people things they don't know in accessible ways. So much of what I do is tackling really difficult, potentially difficult topics that maybe the layman doesn't really, it may be overwhelming for them. And frankly, I start them a little overwhelmed myself. And I figure if I'm overwhelmed, and if I can understand them and I can explain them to others, I take a lot of satisfaction doing so. And then that's a lot of, I take on difficult topics, one could argue, and I'm not knowledgeable about those topics, but I figure if I can become knowledgeable enough to explain them to people, then I go a long way to shedding light on something important, some big achievement, something that the average reader needs to know, and sophisticated reader too. I try to embrace both audiences as well. Have I done a better job than Carl? Hopefully.
So did you go out of your way to write stuff before you actually became a professional writer, like in high school, college, and stuff? Was writing sort of a hobby?
No, reading was the hobby. I'm a big reader of all kinds of genres, newspapers especially. It never occurred to me, frankly, to be a newspaper reporter. I didn't know anybody in my life. I always assumed I'd go work on Wall Street kind of thing. And then I remember taking a test. I didn't have any clips. I didn't work on my high school. I went to a little small Jewish high school, no newspaper. My college had a really poor newspaper. It didn't cross my mind. And then I remember taking a test to be a reporter, and I didn't have any clips or anything. They give you a leaked document, a quote unquote leaked document. And they say, go write about it. And I remember writing it, and I said, wow, they're going to pay me to write about stuff I'm interested in. Wow, that's what I should be doing. Sounds like just plain fun, outright fun and joy. And truth of the matter is, I thought I did a great job with it. I handed it in, and it was not what they wanted in academia. I remember being taught with a paper, you want to kind of start off slowly, and my conclusions were really great. The pyramid kind of approach. And in newspaper writing, it's the exact opposite, because hardly anyone reads to the end of the newspaper article. So I had to learn that. But I had been a reader, and I read really good stuff over the years, and I learned to write from reading really good writers.
Okay.
You write in your book, when I finished high school, I thought I was done with biology. So
I did.
you bit off a lot of biology to write this book. So
yeah, my kids told me not to do this book.
Yeah.
I was warned away from it because of my background, because frankly, I lived in fear of making a mistake that people like you and your audience would pick up on. But I thought if I could tell this tale, I thought it was a tale that needed to be told. I didn't think it had been told. I think history needs to understand the remarkable achievements. I really do think that what we've seen here isn't fully appreciated today, and maybe it will be eventually for all kinds of reasons. Maybe it's politics, maybe it's other, maybe we're too close to it. But this, to me, I'm no expert, but it strikes me as being among science, maybe in finance's greatest achievement, modern scientists for sure. And again, we're a little too close to it. And I thought it was a story that needed to be told. So I took a deep breath and I got a lot of help, and I can talk about that. But I attempted to write this book.
So you write that early in the beginning, you write, there have been a lot of failures in this story, but I want to write about the triumph. And I guess I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you. Why did you decide to do it that way?
Partly it's if you're going to invest the time and the money in buying a book and spending time with me and my writing, I do, all things being equal, if I can, want you to come away with a positive experience and even a fun experience. And I know this is a pandemic and it's been awful, and I've personally been affected. Everyone has, but I think it's important to understand that there's a positive story that comes out of achievement, of resilience, of stubbornness, of persistence. I don't care if you're in the world of science or not. There are life lessons that you can learn from these remarkable researchers, scientists, executives. So and that had been covered. We've read endlessly about the mistakes leading up to the pandemic, the rollout, politicians. I didn't want to get caught up in that, and this seemed like fertile territory, maybe that hadn't been explored. So, for all those reasons.
When did you start writing it, or decide that you wanted to do it, and then from that, when did it go to press?
So early in 2020. What fascinated me, what really intrigued me, was the paradox that I kept hearing about Moderna. Moderna is at the lead, or one of the leads, and I didn't know much about Moderna, and what people knew about Moderna was not good. They were there were suspicions about the company and its chief executive. I mean, Stefan Bancel. I don't know if you all were aware, but many in the industry, be it investors or scientists, were suspicious, downright suspicious of the guy. He wasn't from the world of science. He's an engineer, an MBA. He and his company were very secretive. And there were suspicions or accusations even that he was a Elizabeth Holmes type person, in that he expressed a lot of confidence. He was great at fundraising, very persuasive, outgoing, a salesman, not a scientist. And I can talk about early on at Moderna how people were literally collapsing in their labs, outside the labs, in their parking lot before coming into the office, at home, collapsing from exhaustion, collapsing from dealing with Stefan. So he was a difficult type person to deal with. And yet, here we are, early 2020, and they may be the ones to step up and create a vaccine that could be effective and protective. I love that paradox. And also the paradox that it wasn't who you would have expected. So who should have stepped up? It should have been Merck and Sanofi and GSK, the vaccine giants. Even if you say, well, okay, what about Pfizer? Pfizer had closed down its infectious disease unit. They weren't a vaccine giant. So I love that paradox. And it's in a lot of my writing, frankly. I can get into it, but it's not always, I keep going back to that theme. I love that theme, unexpected heroes. And that intrigued me in early 2020, that it wasn't clear, obviously, yet. But if Moderna could pull it off, that would be and this company BioNTech, no one had really heard of, and yet it wasn't. Merck and the others, I just found that theme, that dynamic, really fascinating.
Do you think that, and you do a great job in the book portraying Bancel, man? He scares me. I don't want to work for him. Do you think if it were someone else who is more even-handed and doesn't scream at people and just threaten to fight, do you think it would still have worked, or is that necessary to get this done in this kind of a crunch situation?
It's a great question. it's a sample set of one, so we don't know about others. But you can see him as sort of a Steve Jobs type personality, where he's hard driving. And I also don't want to leave the impression with my writing that he's some evil guy. I actually think he's a really good guy. Yes, he wants to get rich and famous, but he also wants to save lives. There are a lot of motivations. I love the motivations in your world. It's just fascinating what drives people and the persistence, and they keep at it. And so many are really trying to help mankind. And I have such respect for that. But it's mixed in with trying to become famous and gain respect of others and maybe make a lot of money. And Ben Sell, I think he early on, there were difficulties at the company. They didn't have enough money. He had left, as you read from the book, he had left a previous job. He was a CEO of a sizable company. And here he is in this little dinky office in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the talent wasn't necessarily wasn't at what he was used to, the level. And he didn't have the personalities around him. And now I talk to scientists within the company, and I can get into this, but my book is really about the lab, the bench, the average scientist, the persistence. It's about the CEOs, but it's also about the people in the middle there that I admire so much. It's almost like a love letter to those types of people that are making progress and persevering every day. I've got such respect for those people. But today, the people I talk to within Moderna, they like Stefan. They like the fact that he pushes them and he inspires them. And he said years ago, he said, we're going to be the ones to step up in a pandemic or in a crisis. And maybe you need to have that kind of personality to achieve greatness, or at least in a biotech company like that.
So back to Kathy's question, you started looking into this in early 2020. When you first started looking into it, were you thinking a book? When did the book happen? And how long did it actually take? Yeah,
so with all my writing, I write for the Wall Street Journal. I did a front page story about Moderna. They're my priority, but always in the back of my mind, if people like the stories, if I like writing them, and if they're successful, obviously you guys know better than I do, there are no guarantees at that point, whether we would have effective vaccines and when. But I thought there was a good chance. When you talk to the people within these companies, it's fascinating that early on, they were getting optimistic. Now we're talking, it was phase 1 and not many people, and we're not there yet. And the question of whether we can get the money to manufacture and whether that'll be effective, et cetera. But when you talk to the people within the companies, they were much calmer, and it was a calming influence on me. They were calmer and more optimistic about the future than the average person out there. And frankly, here I was, deep in my basement office in suburban New Jersey, worried about, like everybody else, about the world and our future. And it was a useful distraction, a comforting distraction, to be working on something positive about people that could potentially save us from this pandemic.
So you interviewed a lot of people, and now hearing that you did stories on Moderna, you obviously had access to people, but probably you're talking to presidents and CEOs and financial people, but you ended up talking to a lot of scientists. So how did you figure out who to talk to? You said you had some help, so maybe that leads into it.
The help was more on understanding the science, and I can get into that.
Okay.
And that was crucial and valuable. My job as a journalist is to find out who's important, who's responsible for certain achievements. And it's always my instinct that the people that often get the credit aren't the ones that deserve it. Often because maybe they're in the public eye a little bit more, they're more accessible. So I don't mean to suggest that the government scientists didn't play a huge role. They did. Let me make that clear. Barney Graham and company did. But they also are much more accessible to the average journalist. So as is people like Carrico, those kinds of people. And again, hugely important. Don't want to mislead in any way. But it was my instinct that for every Carrico or Graham, there's somebody deep in the bowels of a lab somewhere in Cambridge or Maryland, at a Moderna or BioNTech in Germany, Mainz or Novavax outside DC, that had just as many, that is responsible for just as many breakthroughs, and they're not allowed to talk. There are people you'll read about in the book who I believe made huge, remarkable breakthroughs and advances maybe on par with those that we've read about, we've heard about. And you're almost like a fortune chaser. You're looking for fortune, you're a treasure hunter in some ways as a journalist. where's the real achievement? Where's the accomplishments? Where are the advances that haven't been written about? And that's what motivates me. I love that. Like, okay, you're talking to the CEO of Moderna. I love Stefan Bancel. He's responsible for a lot, but he himself wasn't responsible for the scientific breakthroughs within his company. And frankly, he's not always sure who is. And I'm not saying that in any way to be critical of Stefan. He's too senior. So you have to dig a little bit. But that digging, I love that. That's part of the pleasure and the challenge for me as a journalist too, till you get to a Carrie Benedetto, a younger chemist within the company that solved a delivery for them in terms of the LNP, or Eric Wong, who's a mid-level kind of guy too, and who said, guys, it's not working with therapeutics. We've got to shift gears and go to vaccines. No one's ever written about him. So that I personally enjoy writing about those kinds of people and giving them credit where it's due.
Were there any interviews you couldn't get that you really wanted?
I didn't spend enough time with some people for various reasons. I think Albert Bourla is writing his own book, the CEO of Pfizer. Sahin and Tarikia are writing their own books. I did talk to them. But I ended up talking to many more people around them. That was a real challenge too, because here I am in my basement. I had plans to go to Germany and couldn't due to the lockdown. So how do I write about the history of BioNTech and Bancel and Tarikia? And you need to. They're fascinating characters. They're inspiring. They care about the science. They don't care about getting rich. They live in this little apartment. They don't have a television. They don't have a car. They're now shifting gears to cancer and other challenges. And that's their whole life devoted to. I could have dropped some companies along the way, but I didn't want to. And my family told me to. And my editor said, "I'm sure you need to." But I wanted to write about all of them. They're all fascinating and you can learn about them all. So yeah, I had to find, and it took me a while. That was part of the challenge, getting to dozens of people that grew up with Ugur Sahin, or went to school with Ugur Sahin, or were in labs with him early on, or helped start the company with him. So that was part of the challenge, but it's part of the pleasure too, talking to people that had never expressed public opinion about these people and getting them to open up.
How do you do this? Do you record conversations and review them in order to, because I'm sure a lot transpires in a big gush in a conversation.
Yeah, sometimes I do. Frankly, I need my subjects to be comfortable. And so whatever way, sometimes they don't want to be recorded, and that's okay too. My whole goal is to make people comfortable so they can open up and share. And frankly, a lot of times they're sharing things they shouldn't share, or they've been told not to share, or they're uncomfortable sharing, not for any kind of, this aren't state secrets kind of thing. But, if you're working for a company, you're not always encouraged to talk about the advances. It's proprietary. Sometimes you worry about criticizing others. So my goal, and we could talk about this, but you guys are a whole different type of breed. I love scientists because you're just more honest. You're much more frank and honest than people have experienced until now. Corporate executives and investors and hedge funds, those kind of people, they're off the record most of the time, or they don't like to be on the record. You guys just dish on each other. I love it. It's a great industry you guys are in. So you're very open and honest. And I appreciate the honesty.
That's because we're stuck with the data.
Right. It's all about, the scientific method. And also scientific method, I'm speaking to scientists, what do I know? But scientific method is about challenging each other, right? And sometimes criticizing each other. There's a character in my book, those who have read it, Adrian Hill, who is just a difficult personality. He's really hard on peers, on colleagues. He's notorious. But some people say, Greg, he's just trying to get at the truth, getting at a solution, getting at the right approach. So people who take it personally, getting criticized publicly, shouldn't. So I find that dynamic really fascinating.
Did you end up talking to Adrian Hill or at all?
Adrian, I did not talk to. He's another one I would have liked to have talked to.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it took me forever. I talked to people within his group. I don't want to get into who, but people who worked very closely with him. And sometimes that's even better because they're more honest they can often be more honest than the subject themselves. They give good perspective. So yeah, that took me a long time to break into that group, but thankfully I did.
I tried to
So-
get one more thing, Rich. Sorry,
No, go ahead.
I tried to get Hill on TWiV a long
Oh,
time
wow.
ago because one of his former associates I know, and she's here. She was here in New York, so she said, "Oh, I could get you him on TWiV," and so. He replied to both of us, "No, I don't have any time for this."
That's Adrian Hill. You'll read about him in the book. That is probably the kindest thing he would have said to you. That you should be honored.
So, not everything you have to say about everybody in the book is flattering. Okay. I'm interested, and I'm interested, how you sort of proof what you wrote, whether people who are quoted in the book get to see what they're quoted, who reads the proofs, what's that process like?
So I've been at the Wall Street Journal since 1996, and we have something called no surprise journalism, an ethos there. And I'm old enough to remember when it was introduced, and I'll explain what it is in a second. And there was a lot of pushback on the part of journalists and what that means is no one is ever surprised by what we write at the Wall Street Journal. They can act like they're surprised. They can pretend they're surprised. How dare they write this, whatever. And they often do, which is their prerogative. There's a prerogative. But we don't send articles to anyone. But we let them know. They'll know bullet points. They'll know the gist. They'll know what we're going to say. And there was pushback again originally because let's say you got some big scoop and we're going to tell someone what we're going to write. And what if they go to a competitor and share it? And that was a concern, but I'm such a believer in it because you can sleep at night. And in that, they know what I'm going to write. And even if it's hard going through that process, frankly, of either emailing or calling and saying, I'm about to say the following, I'm going to say it in a book or an article, but you can sleep at night because there's often an other side to every story, everything. There's always some explanation. Not always. There's always some nuance that maybe you miss. And this gives me a chance to hear whatever that nuance is. Someone did something really outrageous in the book or elsewhere, but maybe there was an explanation. Maybe there was something that happened preceded that I wasn't aware of. Or at the least I know they've had a full chance to react if they'd like to. So the people that I write about in my book have all had a chance to react. Some, I'm not going to get to who, but some, we started off very friendly, and by the end, they were outright, it was difficult. But it is what it is. To the point where, I was a little nervous. But at least I'm comfortable knowing that they've had a chance to hear everything and react to everything. And sometimes they'll say, Greg, you're missing some point. Greg, you don't realize what happened right before that. Greg, there's some nuance here. So that process is really important to me and to my colleagues also at the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, and there are several places in the book where you throw out some scenario and then offer a different perspective. That sounds like that's part of the process. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just thinking in particular, Ed Skolnick, senior guy at Merck, who I think comes off really positively in the book. He was really, really angry with me, and that's fine. I respect that view, and you don't have to like me. I try to do the best I can. Everything I report, everything I write is based on multiple sources, people who are there, firsthand accounts. But it could be the people that had those accounts could misremember it potentially. So there's some little anecdote I'm just remembering in my book where he dug his fingernail into a wooden table within Merck for so many years that it chipped away. Big chunks had fallen out according to people that were there. And to me, that's a sign of his intensity, his drive, all impressive qualities, frankly, but he didn't necessarily see it that way. So, and I respect that. I completely respect that. And he says it didn't happen. So I put that in the book as well.
I think you portrayed him very well because I knew him, and he.
Oh wow!
He has different portrayals by different people who have worked close to him. So I think you did a good job. I wanted to ask you about your approach. So it's really fully 2/3 into the book, maybe more, before you get to COVID vaccines, right? The front, which I absolutely like, totally is background on many of the players, right? In fact, you spend a lot of time on a failed AIDS vaccine. And so just explain why you decided to do it that way instead of starting with COVID vaccines?
Yeah. So partly it's when you work on these books. I mean, this one took me a year and a half, and that was a fast one, but it was all encompassing. It's all you think about. I mean, you can ask my wife and my kids. And as such, it's got to be something that really interests you. You hope people respond to it. You hope people like it. The reviews are good. People buy it. But at the end of the day, you're living with this stuff. And I frankly was fascinated by the chase for an HIV vaccine in so many ways. Partly it's because your audience, and you know it as well as anybody, it's some of the same players. You keep hearing the same names. Fauci and some of the Gail Smith and Novavax was one of the early guys chasing vaccine. Ad26, the J&J chimp adeno approach, they were all developed with HIV. And you got fascinating parallels where Merck was so close. They were out leading the pack in terms of an HIV vaccine. They thought they'd be the ones. They were using Ad5, and yet it all collapsed, and it haunts. So it still haunts them today, I would argue. And that's part of the reason why they didn't 100% go after a COVID-19. So there are a lot of lessons that can be learned too. And there's the spike protein. There's fascinating, the envelope there with HIV. There are a lot of fascinating parallels. And also, I think it's important. So I'm a novice. I do this to learn and to be educated. And I kept hearing in my research, well, we learned this in HIV, and we're applying it to COVID-19. And I, as an outsider, I say, really? Wasn't it a failure, the whole HIV vaccine effort? And they say, no, Greg, there's no failures in science.
Right.
We learned lessons. We learned so much about the immune system, about running trials, so many things that I didn't cross my mind that, so I think the only way to understand the adenovirus, the viral vector approach, is to go back in history and see how it evolved. So, the personalities are fascinating. So, and maybe I'm indulging myself, but I think you have to understand that history to appreciate also the enormity of this achievement. So many people are like, well, it was overnight success in 2020, and I'm nervous about it, et cetera. And I do it partly to reassure. I've done Fox a few times, and I love going on Fox. And partly I go on Fox to make the point that you should be reassured by the history of these approaches and by how serious-minded these researchers are, and there's no politics involved, and they're out for glory and they're out to save people's lives. But by showing the twists and the winding and the path leading from HIV, I think maybe that can reassure people, hopefully.
I really like the approach for exactly that reason. We do these town halls on vaccine education to reassure skeptics and hesitant individuals. And one of the most common questions is, I don't trust it because it happened overnight, and most vaccines take so much longer. And your book really nicely makes the point that it's not overnight.
Yeah, I want to leave that. I want the reader to take that away without me actually saying it. I'm a storyteller, so I don't need to knock them on the head, and maybe that won't work that way. But I do want them. I'm hoping they come away saying, "Well, geez, they've been working on this for decades. I had no idea." I feel a little bit more reassured.
Yeah, I also liked it for that reason. And for me,
Thanks.
It was all, I was reading about characters, and I knew that they were going to play, what part they were going to play as we got closer and closer and into the vaccine. And it was just really fun to hear all that background, and I didn't mind that it went that way. I mean, I think it was really effective for me.
You mentioned...
Thank you.
I just want to clarify. I liked it. I just wanted Greg to explain why he did it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, there's some who don't. As a writer, I obsess with the negative reviews, not the positive ones. And there's one person on Amazon who's like, well, it takes a little while to get going. And I get that. But it may not be for everyone, but hopefully it's for enough people.
You mentioned a while ago that you had help with the science and that you could elaborate on that. So elaborate on that. I'm interested.
So there are three people. Yeah, there are three people I really want to thank publicly. There's a young woman in my town. She's the daughter of friends named Lauren Sherman, who works in a lab. She's not yet have her PhD, but she's both brilliant, but she's also able to explain things in a simple way to a dumb person like myself. And we would have these sessions where she was my tutor, and I would ask her the dumbest questions possible. And because she's maybe both knowledgeable, but also someone I'm friendly with, I didn't feel awkward in any way. So she was a tutor along the way. And then there were two scientists, Peter Krell and Jason McClellan. Jason McClellan, who is in the book and I think he was on the show as well, right? At one point. He's obviously the structural biologist in Austin, Texas, Austin. He read every chapter, as did Peter Krell, who's a really fine scientist as well, academic. So they each read my chapters as I wrote them. I sent it to them, but I also sent large sections to, as I said earlier, people who were involved in those endeavors, those science. If it was about them, then they know the points, not the whole part of it. But those three scientists, I really want to thank publicly. Yeah.
So when you're done, do you feel like you understand molecular biology, DNA, RNA, protein, that stuff?
I think Lauren, my tutor, said I was at AP bio level kind of thing. So I don't want to pretend. I know a lot of stuff that others don't know about the history and the evolution and the personalities and the challenges, and that I'm finding even people that were involved didn't know. But I'm not going to pretend. I understand the science, but I'm no expert whatsoever.
I think AP bio level, that works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could just listen to if you listen to an episode of TWiV, do you understand most of it? That's really the test, I think.
Right. And Rich also has a video. Yeah, they're great. There's great stuff out there. Yeah, I've watched all your stuff. And listen, I should have said it at the beginning. I feel right now like I'm watching. You go to the Yankee game, you watch the players, and you're invited on the field. You guys are like, the Yankees, and I've learned so much from you. I don't mean that to be flattering. I'm just being honest. So I'm a fan, and I've watched it, and I've learned from all you guys. So I'm speaking for the audience. We thank you for your work.
So you mentioned earlier that you didn't want to have mistakes that scientists find, and in fact, I found very few. Which is unusual, but I did want to, and one is not a mistake, but I think an impression I just wanted to correct. You make a statement at some point that even Jonas Salk, Albert Sabin, and other vaccine heroes usually lacked a mastery of the diseases they were combating or a full understanding of why their vaccines worked. I got to know them pretty well because I was working on polio, and I have to say that's not right. They were brilliant at understanding polio. And they both understood how their vaccines worked. And so I think that's not a correct assessment. I don't know, maybe someone told you that, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone told you because people are very competitive, right? He doesn't know anything.
In your world, competitive? No. I differ.
With unlimited grant money? Are you kidding?
The money aspect fascinated me. The outsiders have no idea the pressures. Part of why I wrote this book is to give people an understanding of the pressures the postdoc has, the average scientist, the PI has, trying to raise money. I gained a new appreciation, and I did that for the masses. I'm not going to dispute what you said. The only thing I do want to note is that I love the line, I think around the same section, Danny Dweck, who's at the NIH, said to me, and I guess he teaches this line. He goes, what does he says? Why is for rabbis, what is for scientists?
That's
something
right.
like
That's
that.
right.
So that left an impression.
That was
on
good.
me.
I have to send you one day the letters that Albert Sabin wrote me, telling me I didn't know anything.
Well, I really, this brings up in my mind something you said earlier that that you touch on and really comes across in the book that I really like, and that is that the motivations in many of these scientists are really complicated, and a complicated mashup of genuine academic motivation, wanting humanitarian motivation, and wanting to be rich and famous. Okay, it's complicated.
Yeah. So Rich, I love gray characters, and in all my books, I've written a few at this point. Readers have said, "Well, Greg, I like the book. I'm not sure if I like the main characters," and I love that because I think we're all sort of gray in some ways. And there's some writers, I won't get into it. Some writers like to smooth off the edges and have heroes, distinct heroes, and villains. And there are cases in life, but generally speaking, there's a lot of gray. And Yeah, people have mixed motivation, and that's okay. That's okay to want to get rich or want to get famous or just want to save lives or some mix thereof. That's fine.
I thought it was good that you had, well, first of all, I was surprised at a number of people that had amazing backgrounds of like graduated from college at age 16 and things like that, a couple of prodigy types, but also plenty of journeymen scientists or utility infielder scientists. You know, I would be happy to be a Major League Baseball player and be a utility player, you know, so you need those. And I could relate to that. And so I liked the variety of backgrounds and characters that you had portrayed.
So Kathy, one of the things I took away personally from my research is an appreciation for those, I don't know if you call them journeymen, just stubborn scientists who are convinced they've got an approach that'll work. And frankly, too many of us on the outside dismiss them. So a company, Novavac, I just kind of find them fascinating. The stock's at like $2 a share and they've sold off assets and they're about to close and everyone's given up on them. People like me have dismissed them. Oh, right. They failed trial after trial after trial for everything. RSV, Zika, MERS, SARS, they name it. They've failed. But within the labs, you start talking to the scientists there. And I've talked to dozens at these places. They're serious-minded scientists who come in every day and they hope to make incremental progress. Like I'm a journalist. I like churning out product, and to have the patience and the persistence, I admire so much, to keep going in there in that lab and to believe in what you're doing, and then there are dead ends. And yeah, in some ways, it's like a love letter to those people. I really admire. I came away really admiring those kinds of researchers.
In that regard, you make the point repeatedly throughout the first 2/3 of the book that most people, the vast majority of people, were highly skeptical of the messenger RNA approach. I frankly didn't think about it much. I mean, for years, if anything, I thought about DNA vaccines, and from what I knew, I thought, well, you know, I'm not so sure about that. And the interesting thing, and you know, in the face of all that skepticism, there were a few individuals who pushed it to the limit, without whom none of this would have happened, because it turned out to be not straightforward. But the interesting thing is that in retrospect, this is one of these things where now that we know how to do it, you look back and you say, oh, well, that's obvious.
Right.
But it's not. Interesting.
Yes. As I read about it. Yeah. And I also personally find it really instructive, the sort of relay race, as it were, in mRNA, or, you know, maybe other breakthroughs too. So it's not overnight. The average layman kind of sees this overnight success. You're in a eureka moment. No, you know, I started off with John Wolfe at Wisconsin in 1990 or late 80s, and he made some progress, but then he gets diverted, he gets frustrated. He passes the baton to the group at Duke, Eli Gilboa and his group, and they make some progress, but then give up on mRNA and pass it to Carrico and Weissman. They make huge advances, but in the end, they get stuck too, and they can't raise money, and they didn't really create a therapy. So I love that process, and that's what scientific breakthroughs truly are. And that's, again, I don't come out and say it, but that's hopefully the theme that people get from the book.
Yeah. In the old days, as I was going through my educational experience, there was a group at Rockefeller University prior to when I was there who touted that protein was the genetic material. And of course, it was proven at Rockefeller as to what the genetic material actually was. And if you look back before that discovery, you could fill a room with books on all the other things that thought that was the genetic material. It was replaced by a single word. All of those efforts, and those were dedicated people that thought they were right because they had proof, they had data, they had intuition, they had motivation, and they were going to prove to the world that they were correct. And along comes another group, and oh, by the way, did you see this over here? You know, that the way scientists behave, though, after that is, if you don't give up your beliefs, that's at that point it's a belief, because now the data is the evidence, right? Then you think the election was rigged, and you will always say the election was rigged, no matter what. DNA is the genetic material, and that is the way it is. And so you're going to have to deal with that now. And a lot of people find it difficult to change direction after they've been hooked on an idea for so long. And that holds science back a little bit, but it always self-corrects. And I think that's what I love most about science, is that it does self-correct. I might not self-correct it, but somebody else will definitely come along and do the right experiments.
As opposed to other pursuits in life or other areas of life where you can hold on to an opinion forever.
Yeah, exactly right. A belief system is on this side, right? And we constantly bring that up on our show. Science is not a belief system. It's a set of facts, and you can deal with them as you wish.
Yeah, yours is a really it's a wonderful pursuit, a wonderful area of study. You would not be as happy knowing you guys in some of these other areas. Politics, can you imagine? Yeah, the data isn't as important there.
So you bring up politics. I don't know if you know Helen. What's the lady's name who writes the daily column? Rich Helen.
Oh, no.
Heather Cox
Richardson.
Heather Cox Richardson writes a daily email she sends out. And she said the other day, she's talking about how a certain party is anti-knowledge, and anti-expertise. And she quoted Richard Nixon, who said the professors are the problem in this country. And now, that's not just politics and religion and so forth, but it's science now, quite clearly, that many people do not believe and professor is a word for scientists as well, right?
Yeah, well, welcome to my world. I work for mainstream media, so
absolutely.
Yeah, welcome to. I think there's a sense today. It's like a DIY kind of thing. Do it yourself. I can go and learn it myself and ignore maybe the same internist, my physician I've been going to for decades. I saw something on YouTube or someone told me a Facebook post or a friend said something, and that's sufficient. It's sad. Knowledge isn't nearly as important. Reading data, but it's discouraging. And when you talk to some of the people who've created these vaccines, can you imagine that they work so hard and they put their emotion into these things, and then to have a segment of the population not just be skeptical and wary, but just accuse them of make suggestions about their motivations and their politics and what they're trying, and they're trying to harm people. Can you imagine? They destroy themselves. The people I talked to over the past year, the people within Moderna, you can criticize them, and there's reason for criticism potentially in terms of equity, vaccine equity, and maybe how much money they've made and they should be sharing. You can make all those arguments, but the people I know there have been going all out for the last year, and they continue to just their psyches, they're just really destroyed almost. And they need to, I think at the end of the book, I write about how one of the goals of Stephen Hogue, the president, is just to help them emotionally heal. So to have these accusations leveled against them that they've got other motivations, they're trying to harm people, is hard for them to hear.
You made the point that like when there were the supply chain issues and Moderna didn't have the money to get what they needed to make to make lots of vaccines and those kinds of things, that it was like every day that this isn't happening, that's more people that are dying. And then to have the irony of now the vaccine's out there and every day people are dying just because they won't take it,
Yes. Can you imagine? You're right. They were beating themselves up. They still do. Juan Andres, who I write about it in the book, head of manufacturing at Moderna, just a fascinating guy. I don't even recall from the book, but how early in 2020, he's telling his family, he's not a scientist, but he's from that world. He's saying, we got to get toilet paper. We got to get tissues. We got to get food. He bought a third refrigerator, and his wife and his kids and his family thought he was nuts. And he was right. His mother-in-law ended up dying of COVID. And he was frustrated, he was exasperated because they had an approach that they all knew worked, but they didn't have the money to manufacture vaccines. We're talking about as recently as May 2020, and they went to the Gates Foundation, they went to the government, they went to Merck, and they said, let's work together, just like BioNTech and Pfizer were working together. And Stefan Bancel, the ultimate salesman, was failing. He couldn't persuade anyone to work with him. And finally, they went to Big Bad Wall Street. Big Bad Pharma worked with Big Bad Wall Street to save the day when it came to Moderna. So, but like you said, it ate them up, and others too, that they couldn't step up to help people as much as they wanted to.
So speaking, since you write about finance, maybe you could explain So after the first SARS, we recognized that there were potential for other SARS coronaviruses to come into people. And in fact, people started to develop vaccines and antivirals, but there was no financial support for that. So it never happened. We were never ready for this one. And even one of the drugs that may be approved soon, molnupiravir, was discovered 5 years ago, and it could have been ready. So financially, these are for-profit industries. How do we fix that problem? Because health is beyond profit, right?
It's tough. So one thing that I didn't know, but was impressed upon me, is how unpopular vaccines are as a business until this past year. Now, the billions and billions of profits, but historically, vaccines are just kind of a loser business. You spend years working on something and then it peters out, Zika and MERS and SARS, and you think you've got a good approach, but you can't prove it because there aren't enough cases. And I think that's one of the reasons why Merck, I get inside Merck in the book, and how there was a debate within Merck. This is the spring of 2020, should we pursue COVID-19 as a vaccine? And some people we're Merck. This is a rich history, mumps, measles, rubella, etc. We should be doing this, but others said, it could peter out. And they lost money pursuing some of these recent pathogens and in vaccines. So it was impressed upon me by people in that world, in the world of pharma, that vaccines are just not a popular area. Going back to HIV, that's another reason I bring up HIV. I write about that early on. Even there, you had Merck, but most of them were biotechs that were chasing it. This microgenesis I write a lot about. So, I think you need the Gates Foundation and maybe government bodies to step up. But I am, much more optimistic. Maybe we're in a new era where people see that there is money to be made in vaccines and the new pathogens. And unfortunately, it's a new era of spillover from animals and such. So maybe we'll have to be more unaware. So maybe there will be money made for these kind of new approaches.
So I want to ask a question that's related more to the way I took in the book. So some of our audience started with us when we were audio only. Some of them still listen only audio. And about the only way that I can do books that I have time for them is that I do audio. So I do Audible books. So that's how I took in your book. And I know at least one author was able to audition a narrator for her book. But I have the feeling that you were completely separated from that because you are pronouncing the scientific words correctly, and the narrator of your book makes just tons of mistakes. Not only with scientific words, but place names, people's names. And then I'll just relate one of them for now, but it's where you talk about a lysate, and it's a mixture of things. And we use the Yiddish word, and he says gemish. It's like, no.
That's frustrating. I didn't know that.
Gemish.
Gemish. Listen.
And that's not even a science word. And it even has in the line that it's a Yiddish word. And it's like, your job is to narrate this book. Find out how to pronounce the words that you don't know. So I'm guessing that you had no say in that, but.
No, so I'll explain. This process was different than usual in that I went extra fast, and not in terms just like the vaccines. I didn't cut corners, but I worked harder than ever, and I worked right up until August. I was changing things, which is very unusual, and we turned it around really quickly because we wanted to get out. It's obviously very timely and such. So as a result, I wasn't aware whatsoever of, and usually they should ask me. They often in the past, my books, they ask me if they have an issue. I think they asked me Ugur Shahin, how do you pronounce that? That's about it. He asked me a few times, so I don't mean to be critical of him. Maybe he was under the gun as well. But that's frustrating to hear that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. They got. He got Lois Miller right. She was one of my former colleagues, so that one was important to me. But and we were thinking that our own Alan Dove, who does now do some audio readings, he could he could be the next person to do this kind of thing. But you're not alone, because
Or
I listened to
Rich
David
with that voice of Rich.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
There are
I listened to David Quammen's Spillover, and that was painful also because of the
Oh, is that true?
words
Wow. So I'm in
that were
good company.
mispronounced.
Jeez.
Yeah, right.
there are some scientists with good voices, so they ought to get on that, because that would be great, because these guys, Rich and Alan, would know how to pronounce.
Actually, I
everything.
would love doing that, but I can't. My guess is it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right. You are
I've
right.
done some recording before in the past, and one little slip up and you start again. That's not just one take.
Dude,
right?
You had a career in science. It wasn't easy either.
That's right.
Yeah, and so I'm done.
There's a lot of retakes in that also, Rich.
True.
I wondered if you could share your thoughts on why there is this kind of vaccine hesitancy for an amazing set of vaccines as you've described in your books. What can we do to fix that?
So everything is politicized today. Everything is tribal. Everything is my team versus your team. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Frackers, and it's about this revolution where we found all this natural gas, oil in the country, and you can say that it helped. It's helping in terms of the transition to what we all, even people in that world, believe we need to do: make a transition to alternatives. And you could argue that maybe it slowed things down. But be that as it may, I travel the country to places I've never been to, little towns in Oklahoma and Texas and North Dakota, Louisiana, and it was eye-opening for me. And these are people that have very different political views often and lifestyles, and yet you break bread with them and you share a meal and you talk, and we have much more in common than we think. The two sides of every issue, and yet we don't have interaction like we used to. I remember years ago I went to some breakfast, and I think Michael Bloomberg was talking about the issues in Washington, D.C., and he had an interesting thesis as to why there's so much more divisiveness. He said that transportation is much better today, such that politicians go home on Fridays as opposed to sticking around and having a drink with each other,
Sure,
and
that's right,
a meal
that's
with
right.
each other from both sides of the party. And I think in general, we don't get to know each other. So everything becomes a reason to suspect the other side and accuse the other side. So, President Biden was suspicious of the vaccines early at one point. You can argue that President Trump was put pressure. He wanted it to go faster than it could have. Everything becomes politicized, and it's so sad. It's just so sad because I'm a moderate. I see lots of good and bad in others, and we're on the run. We moderates. So I guess my answer to you, long-winded argument, is that answer is that, like much else in society, everything's just become politicized, and vaccines as well. The contrast with polio. Like I was going through the history of polio, and polio was what you guys know better than I do. 60% affected that original
55
vaccine.
55, yeah.
And it was front page news. People were literally dancing in the streets. And you could argue maybe it's more lethal or affects you more, but the contrast with vaccines that are 95% effective. And frankly, I've been so naive. I remember making the prediction that people were skeptical, but they'll get on board when this is authorized, or at least when it's approved. And it's been very disheartening.
So trust issues. Yeah, there are trust issues is a big deal.
Yes. And getting to know each other, getting to know the scientists. I mean, hopefully they'll read the book. And I've gone on Fox. I love going on Fox and trying to make people appealing. I mean, part of the reason I write these books is to show that they're real people, and they're fascinating, interesting people who you might even root for, who are working on these vaccines and doing hard work, and they're not out to hurt anyone. And I'm not sure everyone's aware of that. Everything you read on Facebook or what have you doesn't always suggest that.
All right, let me ask you one final question, and then we'll let you go. Without COVID, where would Moderna, Novavax, BioNTech be today?
I think their stock prices would be small percentages of where they are today. There would be even more skepticism. I don't think BioNTech and Ugur Sahin have made much progress on cancer. He's a cancer researcher, as is his wife, Özlem Türeci. I want to give her a lot of credit as well. You don't want to count them out. They are taking all these billions they've made and plowing it into cancer and other kinds of things. So one thing that you learn from the book is not to count these people out, but I don't think there are any new signs of progress since the beginning of 2020. Moderna is no closer with anything with a therapeutic. I mean, I write about in the book how they ran into a dead end in therapeutics. So in terms of vaccines, I do think they have interesting data in flu, but I think it's phase 1 kind of data. So I thought you were actually going to make the point. What would have happened if the virus had emerged 2017? We're so lucky that it emerged in 2020 because we weren't ready. These vaccine approaches, the viral vector 1-2, they just hadn't made enough progress. So we have to be I'm so grateful that the science had progressed to where it was. Had it not, we've been so much worse off right now.
That's an interesting point. What a couple of years earlier, it might have taken much longer to make vaccines. Yeah.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Sure.
And also that, I'm not sure how far back you want to say we could go with this, but the technology allowed us to mostly work from home. School from home, not ideal, but still better than no school at all, potentially. And, so all of those things, like how it would have been had this emerged, even in 1970.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you could make the argument. I'm not sure it's accurate yet. We don't know. You could make the argument that net, this period might be seen as a positive, believe it or not, if these companies, like I write about, these scientists, Moderna and BioNTech and the others, take all these billions they've made and they use it to make progress on cancer, on turning off the immune system for immune for things like lupus and MS, maybe malaria. They're trying to AIDS still. I mean, Dan Baruch in Boston is still focused on AIDS. Listen, I don't want to say I'm optimistic, but I'm hopeful. You want to end on a hopeful note, hopefully.
Well, I think also there will be more pandemics, and this has taught us that given a lot of money, you can make a vaccine in less than a year, right?
Yes.
That is,
I think, done simultaneously. Yeah,
that's transformative because before that we said no, we need more than a year, and now we know we can do it faster. So when we have the next flu pandemic, maybe we'll see what happens there. You must have a copy of your book there. Can you hold it up and show people?
I even have 2, believe it or not.
All right. I have mine here. I have mine here, and when you come to visit, you have to autograph it for me.
It'll be an honor. And again, I want to thank you. Just on the part, I'm more of an audience member than a scientist, but thank you for your work and education during the pandemic.
Pleasure. Thank you for coming. Yes, Rich.
I want to say I just really enjoyed the book.
Yeah.
Because of my background and because of TWiV, I know a fair amount about this, but I learned a lot more. Okay. And I have a much better appreciation for what went into the history of getting to the point where we are. And I really appreciate learning about some of the people involved. You do a great job with it. So
thank you so much.
A great book.
Yeah. Good storytelling about the people, which is what we've always heard is the way to tell about science, is tell about the people.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. And I hope the audience, I'd love to hear constructive criticism as well. Some of my best sources are people that start off an email saying, Greg, you got something wrong. And we go back and forth. And I'm still learning. This is why I do this for. So I'd love to hear from people as well if they want to reach out.
I'm sure you will hear, probably through us, because we get lots of email, and I'll pass them on to you for sure. Greg Zuckerman, author of A Shot to Save the World. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Greg. See you.
Well, that was lovely, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
You never know what an author is going to be like, right?
That's true.
I mean,
he's a pistol.
I didn't have any conversations. I just had emails. So, but I guess if you write a cool book, there's got to be something in you, right?
He's a truth seeker.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
And I really appreciate that.
I mean, he's willing to listen to people tell him what the story is. And he can couch it in human terms. That's a talent. That's a rare talent. I was going to ask him if he went to journalism school, but apparently he didn't.
No.
And why didn't he? I wonder why he didn't.
Well,
sounds to me like he just started writing and it worked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Carl Zimmer didn't go to J school, right? He went to.
No, that's true, but
he majored,
a lot of people do.
And you know what, Dixon? Some scientists major in literature before they do science.
This is all true.
Well,
this is all true.
Like Harold Varmus, right?
Ah, right.
But he did end
Well,
up.
I didn't go to business school, and the lab is a small business. I could have used some business.
It is
school.
a small business. You're absolutely right on that one.
I think more so today than ever, right? Boy.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I'm supposedly running a business, and as I've been told by many people, I don't know nothing about business, and they're right.
You know what? Neither does anybody else, so don't feel bad.
No, there are people who know a lot about business. I don't know anything. So,
Well,
so far we're just stumbling around. But all right, let's do a couple of emails before we move on to picks. And I think Rich Condit ought to take that first one.
Okay. Dr. How would you pronounce this? Lep or Lepi?
Lepe.
Dr. Lepe writes, Dear Twivers, in episode 822, Rich Condit makes a very interesting recount on the origin of the Virology that caused smallpox in humans, stating the cat,
Oh my
has
gosh.
gotten into this, trashing my desk.
Yep.
Episode 822, Rich Condit makes a very interesting recount on the origin of the Virology that caused smallpox in humans, stating, based on available evidence, a jump from rodents to humans around 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. In this regard, and given the general fact that around 7,000 years ago, humans domesticated cattle in Africa and the Middle East, and the lucky immune cross-reactivity of cowpox and smallpox, cattle was an intermediate host of smallpox between rodents and humans. Also, in support of this general idea, it is generally assumed that the success of Spaniards in conquering the New World was in great part due to the introduction of smallpox and measles, which were not present in the Americas, nor was domesticated cattle in the continent. Regarding variolation, Chinese were blowing crusts from lesions into the nose of uninfected people way before Jenner. Thank you for your great contribution to viral knowledge. Yes, indeed. Well, of course, we don't know really what the chain of events was to get smallpox into humans, but your description here, it's likely a zoonosis of some sort, and your description here reminds me that some of the problems that we're experiencing currently are because humans are encroaching ever more on their environment and rubbing up against the animals more and more. So domestication of animals could be another source initially of spillover. Yes, the conquest of Mexico and Central and South America, the Spaniards had a disease on their side, both smallpox and measles, and I think that did 90% of the work. And yes, the Chinese had another kind of inoculation rather than scarification that was practiced a long time ago, blowing crusts into nostrils. So thanks for that.
Kathy, can you take the next one?
Yes. Anonymous writes, thank you for your wonderful podcasts. It is so heartwarming and reassuring to hear discussion and debate as you decode and make sense of the scientific articles. In particular, I very much appreciate listening to Vincent working through the publications. It is no easy feat to present the material in a way that deals with the findings, accounts for perspectives, and scrutinizes the methodologies and makes them accessible to the audience. Bravo. I work for a health union as a researcher, but my background is in sociology. And as part of my role, I need help responding to a vaccine-hesitant healthcare worker. This individual contracted COVID-19 in early 2021. They recently had their antibody levels tested, and according to their doctor, the levels were very high, or at the highest level the test registers. The healthcare worker asks, if my antibodies are at the top of the range, why do I need a vaccine? I would like to provide a medically informed explanation that doesn't simply refer to the policies in place, which, by the way, I totally support, requiring the healthcare worker to be fully immunized. I do know that antibodies are not the be-all and end-all, and that there is the adaptive arm of the immune system. I also know that we don't know when and how quickly her antibody levels will drop. However, I don't know what or how to talk about the other parts of the immune system and their role in protection. I've listened to TWiV 802 twice and will listen again, and I am working my way through Lauren Samperek's How the Immune System Works. Thanks for the recommendation. Up to now, I've had trouble reading immunology papers. It is so complex, but this text is helping. Can you please help? I am supposed to have a response by the end of October. I doubt this query will make it onto one of the questions read on TWiV, and that's fine by me, as I would appreciate my name and role remaining entirely confidential. Any help is appreciated. Anonymous. So the first part about this person having been told by their doctor that their antibody levels were very high, we've heard now again, both I said it and then Daniel reiterated on the very next TWiV, that we don't know what these antibody test levels mean, that we have nothing to compare them to. And so something registering, quote, high, we don't know what that means for long-term protection. There is evidence that protection from the vaccines is better than protection from the disease itself, which seems counterintuitive in some ways, but that's what the data support. And so because of that, the recommendation is that somebody who's had COVID-19 should still get vaccinated.
I think part of my answer to this usually is that the immune response to an infection is not uniform across the population. And as Kathy already pointed out, we don't really know what antibodies mean because there's a lot more than that going on, and we don't really know ultimately what the correlates of protection are. The response to vaccination is better studied and more uniform, so we have more confidence as to what the result of that's going to be. Plus, we have this information that the combination of infection and vaccination gives you a superpower. And I'm trying to remember where we discussed that. I think that was with Paul and Theodora, wasn't it? Isn't that partly their work?
It was with them and also Shane Crotty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So 796 is the last episode with Paul and Theodora. Yeah. And I think we discussed it with them. And let me look up Crotty. 802. Mm-hmm. Another epitope with Shane Crotty. Okay, so you might listen to those and get some more of the science behind the impact of vaccinating over infection.
Another thing that I think I got, and Brienne made this point really clearly that I had not appreciated, is that when you get the infection, she pointed out that a lot of what the virus does is counteract some of the host immune response. So when you get the infection, the immune response that you develop might not be as good as when you get the vaccine, when all you're getting, in this case, is the spike protein. You're not getting all the other viral proteins that might damp down the immune system. And so you're getting sort of the best tippy-top immune response that you can to the spike protein, whereas in an infection, there may be things that are counteracting you getting such a good response. So that's a scientific explanation for why that could be.
Right.
And I can't quote chapter and verse on this, but I think I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong or point me in the right direction, that there's actual sort of epidemiological data at this point that's in terms of hospitalizations and recurring infections. Saying that vaccinated people fare better than convalescent individuals. Does this ring a bell?
I think it's mixed. It varies according to the study, right?
Okay.
So that tells us we don't have enough yet to really know. But from my perspective, this idea that if you get a single dose of vaccine after you've recovered gives you this incredible breadth of immunity and high levels, that is just great. I don't know why you'd pass it up, right? It's just one dose.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I don't understand. There's no downside.
Right.
It's not going to hurt you.
Right.
Okay, it can only do good.
Yeah, apologies, we didn't get it to you by the end of October.
Yeah, sorry
but-
about that. Sorry.
Oh, well.
But I think probably many people have a similar question.
Yeah.
So it's still useful to answer. Dixon, can you take the next one, please?
I would be happy to. James writes, an excellent question was asked in an email that Rich read on molnupiravir and the effect of that mutation might have on creation of new variants. It apparently has only a 50% effectiveness against hospitalization. Is this a factor? Enjoy the show. Wish there was a transcript. James.
So this is actually related to the next question from Karen. I'm just listening to your assurances that the virus will be destroyed but will not mutate. So in that question, which Rich read, the idea was, is this drug just going to make more variants because it's a mutagen? It introduced mutations into the genome. And to which I said, well, it should fully inhibit or at least substantially inhibit viral reproduction. So that should also reduce the numbers of mutations that you see.
Right.
And so James has a good point. It's only 50% effective. And then Karen writes, yes, if high concentrations are maintained of the drug, right? That's what you need, the effective concentration, whatever it is. But low concentrations could lead to variants. And that's absolutely correct. A great way to get variants is to pass viruses in low concentrations of inhibitors, right? What are the situations in which you could have low concentration exposure? One, sharing of an expensive drug, lower dose in fewer individuals. Reminds me of AZT in the early days when there wasn't enough to go around. And so people split the pills and shared them. Although in that case, it was still enough because the dose was too high and there were fewer side effects. 2, non-compliance in drug taking. 3, will this drug survive in surface water subsequently used as drinking water? So I don't know how to answer number 1, right? Sharing of an expensive drug. But I don't know how extensive that is going to be, right? But it could, and I think there needs to be warnings against doing that, right? Because yes, then you would have a lower dose and you might imagine that selecting for resistance in some way. Non-compliance, I don't know. Given the atmosphere around vaccines, I think people are probably going to be very willing to take mole or whatever other drug comes out. So I'm not sure, but I would guess it's not going to be much of an issue. But the surviving in water, so this would be as a consequence of being excreted from a person and then redrunk. But water is treated, right, Dixon?
Well, most of the time it is, and that's true. And of course, if it's an organic compound, it's subjected to degradation by microbial ingestion, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that there is a worry about some estrogen lookalikes that come from varieties of drugs like birth control pills and things of this sort. So there is a concern about drinking water because there's a famous study that they did down below Minneapolis that they were measuring caffeine in the river. And they could tell when everyone in Minneapolis took their coffee break. By timing 20 minutes after the coffee break, the level of caffeine, or 30 minutes, something like that, the level would go up because everybody went to the bathroom and then went back to work. So that's where that data comes from. It's kind of a scary thing to realize that is actually going on. So there's a huge concern about where does our drinking water come from and what does it contain?
I just don't know with that last one, if the drug will be in the water, will it survive purification and so forth. No idea.
The other suggestion I might have in this one is that if you really want to get the most out of your drugs, and I'm not recommending doing this, by the way, but if it's an expensive drug and you can lower the dose in half, you might want to drink it with a glass of grape juice, or grapefruit juice, rather.
What does that do?
It's grapefruit juice, for some reason, contains a compound which doubles or sometimes triples the active ingredient of a drug that you've just taken. And that's a known fact. And they don't understand what the factor is in grapefruit juice that does that. But
grapefruit juice is counterindicated if you're on some kind of blood pressure medicine, I think.
Yeah.
Because of, and I've been told it has to do with cytochrome P450 interactions.
Oh,
there you go. That's it. Yeah. Because that does drug activation, right?
Yeah.
There is, what's the name? Lopinavir? Is that the HIV drug that is actually mixed with others because it's a P450 activator?
Ah.
I don't remember the name. Maybe that's wrong, but there is a drug that is often given because it didn't work for AIDS, but it turned out to make other drugs more potent by activating P450. Oh, I was just thinking the drug in surface water is going to be probably so diluted that it's not going to even have any effect, right?
But of course.
So we could probably rule that out, but the others, no, I don't think we can. But, the 50% effectiveness is quite interesting. I don't know why it may not be because it was the wrong concentration or it didn't inhibit properly. There may be other factors when you give it to people as well, right? I'm not sure.
So I double checked, and it is statins, but it's not all statins. But if a statin taker eats a large amount of grapefruit, the level of statins in their blood could increase, raising the possibility of side effects.
Got it.
Now I have to look up the HIV drug because I don't want to be told that I got it all wrong.
It's funny. I don't mind being told that.
Well, I guess one more wouldn't matter at this current level. Anyway, there's lopinavir, right? Lopinavir, ritonavir induces the hepatic activity of cytochrome P450. So that's why it's used. Okay. Let's go on to some picks of the week now. Dixon, what do you have for us?
Well, I'm back to my comedian picks. So I picked one Monty Python player 2 times ago, I believe, which was John Cleese. And now I pick one of his compatriots, Michael Palin, who in this particular segment, Michael Palin plays the role of a pet store owner, and John Cleese plays the role of a disgruntled person who had bought a parrot from that pet store and then took it back because the parrot had died. And Michael Palin spends the entire skit denying the death of the parrot in many, many different ways, all of which are unconvincing. And he's a remarkably deadpan comedian with a wonderful style and a great delivery. And the other thing that Michael Palin is in, I'm sure that a lot of you already know, is the movie called A Fish Called Wanda. And he portrays the role of a person who stutters and he's a wonderful character that he creates from scratch and then stays in character throughout the whole movie.
So he's Ken in Ken.
He's Ken. He's exactly right. And he ends up one of his protagonists ends up swallowing one of his fish while he's all tied up, so he can't do anything about it. And his reaction is absolutely precious.
Great.
He gets it in the end, though. He gets it back.
He does.
Right?
He does.
Right. Oh, that was a terrific movie. Yeah.
It was great. Movie. And that was Michael Palin.
I was going to say, I don't know, can't remember, but yeah, okay. So he's a comedian, right?
He is, and he's also a bit of a philosopher because he had a show afterwards called Michael Palin Pole to Pole. And he went from the North Pole all the way to the South Pole. And he did it as a travelogue. And it was ironic because, well, not so ironic, he just didn't know any better, I think, because when he got to the South Pole and tried to go into the particular base that was there that would offer him shelter, they refused to let him in because he wasn't approved. So he had to turn around and go back.
Interesting. So is this number 7, Dixon?
It might be number 8, actually.
You hope you keep track because you have to stop at 10, right?
I don't have to stop at 10, but I guess I should.
Well, you could go on forever, but you might want to do other things.
No, I do want to do other things, and I think this is a good idea to there was a wonderful radio show on British radio called Desert Island Discos, and it took a famous guest and ask them what their favorite 10 things were. And in this case, what were your favorite 10 pieces of music? If you were isolated on a desert island and you had nothing else, which 10 pieces of music could keep you busy listening to them for the rest of your life? And of course, they never got to number 3 or number 4 because they went off in all kinds of tangents asking, well, why did you pick that? And then, I didn't know you grew up in so-and-so. And it starts a conversation at a different level that really is quite interesting. So I'm sure all of us could have 10 favorite movies, 10 favorite sports cars, 10 favorite sporting events, all those things. So that's
sports cars. I couldn't have 10 favorite sports cars. No.
Well, other people could, I bet.
I mean, how can you have a favorite if you haven't owned one, right?
Jay Leno could have 10 favorite sports cars. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but asking people what their favorite of something is always a good way to have a conversation, right?
Yeah. Well, you're doing the 10 best discoveries in DNA biology, so maybe that's a little spin-off on that too.
Well, I was inspired by you, but I wanted to do something scientific, right?
Right.
Plus, it's really instructive, I think.
No, I'm
anyway,
not.
But I think the conversations we have around comedians is also interesting too, because I don't really look at comedy very much, but it's interesting. I know these people, so I like to hear about it.
Right.
And you are a comedian, Dixon.
Oh, thanks you very much.
You're very funny. In a good way. Okay. Kathy, what do you have for us?
I picked something that it's a little bit self-serving just because the author of this interviewed me. She also interviewed another of my colleagues here at Michigan in our department. But it celebrates the centennial of Science News. And for those of you who might not know, Science News is an American biweekly magazine devoted to short articles about new scientific and technical developments. And so they're gleaned from scientific and technical journals. So that's what Wikipedia has to say about it. And so it has been a nice way to learn science in other areas for me, and also in infectious disease. And this article by Amy Cunningham, it's really kind of a magnum opus. I know she worked on it for months, and it's entitled Epidemics and Their Aftermath. And it actually starts, well, it has, the first photo is from the 1918 flu, but she kind of, anyway, just tells a lot of stories about infectious disease from 1918 onward, and covers a lot of different things, a lot of nice photos, and just definitely worth checking out. I learned things. We've got the picture of Edward Jenner vaccinating James Phipps, for example, the iron lungs for polio, and Elvis getting vaccinated, all kinds of things like that. So check it out. It's really well written and covers a lot of good things.
It looks really excellent.
Yes.
It's good. Rich, what do you have for us?
So I'm basically copying a letter that was an email that was written to me and the TWiV folks. It could be a listener pick, but I'm going to use it for mine. So I'm going to read the letter and then talk a little bit about the article that is referred to in the letter. Hi, Rich and TWiVers. TWiV listener, fan, and neighbor of Ann Skalka. How I found you guys. Discussed in TWiV 822, Viking variola variants with my son, a senior history major at Georgetown. He said, not so fast with the Vikings having smallpox. His professor, Timothy P. Newfield, wrote an e-letter in response to the paper at the very bottom of the link. Realizing you TWiVers were skeptical of some of the paper's conclusions, I was wondering if you had specific thoughts on the e-letter. And he gives a link, and I'll come back to that. Weather is the same as you're experiencing in Texas, less 15 C and with 50% less humidity. That's not the same if it's Tuesday. Cheers, Eric from Princeton. Okay. So the link actually is to the article, but you got to go down to the bottom of the article, and I didn't realize this. There are, one can write in e-letters in response to this. And oh man, hang on. Here it is. Okay, so I had to go through some machinations or make myself a PDF that I could highlight of this. But I think this is really good. The bottom line, let me just give the cut to the chase. The bottom line is the article looked at ancient DNA from individuals from the Viking Age who were identified potentially archaeologically as individuals who could be called Vikings. All right. And identified DNA that phylogenetically grouped with variola virus, the causative agent of smallpox. And we discussed that in detail. It also pointed out that it also discovered that the particular virus that they came up with no longer exists. It was a branch on the variola lineage that died out sometime later, apparently. Okay. And the major point that this letter makes is that just because these individuals had something that grouped with variola doesn't mean they had smallpox. In particular, since it's a virus that no longer exists. So we don't know what the disease manifestations were of whatever it was they had. Okay. They also make the point that there was where the paper treated the history a little too light with respect to Vikings, that they could have done their history a little better and looked at pustular epidemics around then a little better, and realized that the population density was not really high enough to maintain smallpox in the way we know it today, and that the sampling that they did was not really sufficient to draw the conclusion that what it was that they were looking at was widespread. Okay. So I thought that this was a really interesting take on this article that I had missed completely. And let me just give the authors. They are Timothy Newfield. This is interesting. Timothy Newfield, who's in the history department at Georgetown University. Anna Duggan, who's in the McMaster Ancient DNA Center at McMaster University. And Hendrik Poinar, who is also in the Ancient DNA Center in McMaster University. So these authors know their stuff, both from a history and an ancient DNA point of view. So bottom line, it's probably a little quick to conclude that these individuals that were investigated had actual smallpox disease, or that it was widespread. So we're not back to zero with that critique, but it's certainly an interesting spin on the article that I appreciate.
I think I like their arguments. They're interesting. However, they conclude at the end, there's no doubting it was not smallpox. And I don't think that's fair either.
No, that's not fair either.
Right?
Yes. They go a little overboard in their critique.
But the idea that it was a dead end makes perfect sense. And, I guess you could have one amino acid difference and it would be a different disease, right?
Sure. And actually, it's worth pointing out, this is something that we didn't discuss, that as the last stages of smallpox eradication were going on, there was an emerging variant of variola virus called alastrim that was much less pathogenic than smallpox. I think its case fatality rate was about 1% or something like that, but significantly less than variola. And my understanding is that alastrim was actually epidemiologically on the increase. Okay. So, if we could have a complete picture of this, we might find variola-like viruses that waxed and waned throughout the whole history of variola, some of which caused smallpox-like disease, some of which did not, or caused a milder form and was less pathogenic. So that's important to make the distinction between the genetics and the disease.
I would love to hear the authors of the paper respond to this, right?
Yeah, maybe they will.
I hope so. That would be fun.
This e-letters thing is something I didn't know about
No.
either. It's an online forum for ongoing peer review. Submission of e-letters are open to all. They are not edited, proofread, or indexed.
Wow. They're brave.
Yeah.
All right. I am on installment number 6 with my seminal papers in molecular biology, and we're moving to a little immunology today, or as this paper has been called, The Birth of Molecular Immunology. That's actually the title of a commentary that I will also link to by Patricia Gearhart, which is really good. The paper was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science in October 1976. I was in graduate school. Yeah. Was I in graduate school? Yeah, sure I was. And it's by Nobumichi Hozumi and Susumu Tonegawa at the time, they were at the Basel Institute for Immunology in Basel, Switzerland. And it's communicated by Niels Jern, who is a well-known immunologist. And Tonegawa went on to receive the Nobel Prize for this work. Evidence for somatic rearrangement of immunoglobulin genes coding for variable and constant regions. And the commentary puts this in perspective. I'm going to paraphrase that. So when this paper was published, Patricia writes, a controversy was raging about how many germline variable genes there were and how antibody diversity was generated, right? As we've heard recently, we can make lots of different antibodies, and we know how, but at the time we didn't know. But as she says, protein sequencing showed that antibodies had 2 regions right next to each other, contiguous regions. It was a variable region and a constant region. And how these got there wasn't known. There were a lot of people working on this problem, how many V genes there were, probably not a lot of C genes, but a lot of V genes. So if there were a lot of V genes and nobody had even found that, how did they get next to the C gene in the final, to code the final protein, right? And she writes, out of the blue, Hozumi and Tonegawa published a stunning paper that used newly discovered restriction enzymes to digest DNA. And they showed that by hybridization, which I'll go into in a moment, a V gene and a C gene are miles apart in germline DNA, but next to each other in antibody DNA. That was the first immunology experiment to use restriction enzymes and gel electrophoresis to figure out the position of genes in germline DNA and how they were positioned in the cells that make antibody. And she writes, it's worthwhile to look at the techniques because they're so different from the ones used just a few years later. They purified their own BAM-H1 restriction enzyme, which had just been described by Nathans and Smith, who got a Nobel Prize for that. They poured a 2-liter agarose gel into a foot-long tray, cut it with a scalpel, and loaded 5 milligrams of DNA. This monster was subjected to electrophoresis for 3 days. Then they cut the gel into 30 slices, put each slice in a tube, heated it, and the DNA came out, and they purified it with a matrix called hydroxyapatite. There were no southern blots. Well, there were, but people weren't using them. So then they annealed each fraction of DNA with iodine-labeled messenger RNA prepared from a myeloma tumor cell line, which is just making one antibody, right? And it has a lot of mRNA for one of the chains of the antibody. And so in the paper, which is really just one figure, the first figure so they have this issue that the RNA is not pure, right? It's only 90% pure. So by conventional hybridization techniques, it would be hard to know, if you want to know how many places on DNA is this RNA hybridizing to, it would be hard to do with impure RNA. But they show that you can do a titration by adding increasing amounts of RNA to the DNA, and it would give you specificity. So that's one of the figures. And then the second figure is the gel, the experiment where they take DNA from either the myeloma line or the mouse embryo DNA, and they compare them, and they show that the RNA hybridizes to pieces of DNA that are really far apart in the germline, but they're really close together in the myeloma. And one figure, that's the paper, but of course years went into thinking about what experiment to do and the reagents to do it. And so that shows somehow the variable regions got next to the constant region. They didn't know yet how they did that, but that was found out later. And so this is the beginning of molecular, as Brienne has said, this is the first time people began to understand that this is how antibodies are made. And the last sentence of the paper is, the present results, when combined with those of our previous reports, demonstrate that both content and context of immunoglobulin genes are altered during differentiation of lymphocytes. Whether such a genetic event is common in other eukaryotic gene systems remains to be seen.
Brienne mentioned that the choice of the restriction enzyme was crucial. If they had used the other extant one, they would have not gotten the same result. I have 1 degree of separation with Susumu Tonegawa. We were both students with Masaki Hayashi.
Wow.
And so all of those things, cutting up gels into pieces and hydroxyapatite for DNA, all of that is something that I was directly exposed to in Masaki's lab as well.
Two authors
on the paper. And so subsequently, I don't know where Tonegawa went after Basel. He may have gone to Japan.
MIT.
But eventually, in 1980-ish, he came to MIT because I was there and I saw his office was just downstairs from my lab. And as I spoke about before, I used to see him sitting at his desk thinking. But yeah, it's the sort of seminal paper, right, from which everything. Now today, well, you just sequence the genome and find all the antibody bits scattered around versus next to each other. So recombination, and there's also some contribution of splicing in this as well, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
So Wikipedia says he got his degree with Masaki in 1968. Then he went to the Salk and worked with Renato Del Becco, and then he went to Basel. And then it says he went to MIT in 1981.
81, there you go. So we overlapped a year, but I never said a word to him, of course. I don't think I even saw him in person. I just saw him down there in his office. And we have 2 listener picks. Matt writes, "Hello, TWiVers. I've been listening religiously since a friend recommended TWiV early in the pandemic. I have only a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, so I feel like I have just enough background to follow most of what you discuss. I greatly appreciate both the information and the acknowledgement of a lack of information when it exists. I also find a lot of value in your discussions about science communication. I am a practicing forensic scientist, so clearly not a scientist, and as such, part of my job is to communicate scientific results to lay people in the form of expert witness testimony. This is admittedly small but important niche of science communication, and your discussions have had an impact. I'm writing with a listener pick I stumbled across while reading the book Apollo's Arrow. I've enjoyed your discussions over the past year and a half now about the possibility of SARS-CoV-2 eventually becoming the 5th common cold coronavirus, and found this paper hypothesizing that the 4th common cold corona may have been OC43, which may have jumped to humans only 130 years ago as the Russian flu of 1889-91. If this is true, it may help answer some of the questions regarding how long it will take for SARS-CoV-2 to get there. And so his pick is an article, Clinical Evidence That the Pandemic from 89 to 91, commonly called Russian flu, might have been an earlier coronavirus pandemic. It's all about multi-system afflictions and mortality seen in early elderly subjects, children only weakly affected, and so forth. I don't know how. Well, I'd love to hear the TWiV team's thoughts on this. Thanks for all your great work, and please know that your reach extends far beyond the number of actual listeners, as I, and I'm sure many others, pass on the information I get from TWiV to so many others in my life. Matt is in Portland, Oregon. So I think I've heard about this speculation before, and I think it's speculation. I think there's also serological evidence for this as well, which Michael Warby has published about this, as well as others, that's also supportive of an influenza virus infection at that time as well. So I think it's interesting. I don't know how we can ever decide unless we recover specimens from people who died of it who were somewhere frozen, as they did for 1918 influenza virus, right? Seems that should be doable. It's not much earlier.
Yeah,
right?
I wouldn't be. Well, if they did it with flu, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, this article at the end of it does mention the influenza evidence for the same thing.
Yeah.
So, it's an open question.
So Brigitte writes, hello, my TWiV superstars. Brigitte writing from the Laurentides, north of Montreal, where all leaves have now fallen. Snow will be hopefully coming soon, which makes me very happy. Brianne, if you come and visit the area one day, I'm certain I would be able to convince you that winter is the best season of all. I'm just a retired food microbiologist that discovered your amazing podcast at the beginning of the pandemic, thanks to Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite writers, who mentioned you in one of his podcasts. Little did I know that I would join your many faithful listeners and also feel like many of them that you are part of my circle of friends. Indeed, I must say that I truly trust, admire, care, enjoy, appreciate, relish, and love every one of you. Thanks for being there doing what you do. Oh, that's very nice of you. When I heard Vincent pick the work of Howard Temin on TWiV 818, I was so excited, as I already knew about Temin's work, and this time it was because of the very man who referred me to you guys. So I felt compelled to return the favor to Malcolm and send you my pick, which is Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History Podcast, in particular Season 4, Epitope 10, titled The Obscure Virus Club. This is a description from the podcast. Throughout the 1970s, a biologist named Howard Temin became convinced that something wasn't right in scientists' understanding of viruses. His colleagues dismissed him as a heretic. He turned out to be right. The Obscure Virus Club exposes listeners to Howard Temin's remarkable early contributions as a scholar and citizen, and how he endured harsh criticism and many frustrations over the course of his ultimately groundbreaking work on retroviruses. I'm sure you will enjoy this one. I listened to this a long time ago when I was driving. I don't actually listen to pods, and I liked it. It was good. They interviewed Howard Temin's wife, and also Robert Gallo was interviewed. But they never, and no, he introduces him as a co-discoverer of HIV, and they never point out that he didn't actually co-discover it, but so much for that. It's a good episode otherwise, yeah.
Wasn't this also followed by, or was accompanied by, a similar one about David Baltimore? Or am I thinking of another pair of podcasts that I think I found out about him through TWiV?
Oh, so he interviewed David for this as well, yeah.
Okay.
And actually that was interesting because David says, it took 6 weeks to do the experiments to show reverse transcriptase. But of course, we knew where to look because of all the years of work before that. Kind of like the Tonagawa paper, right?
Right.
And Kathy, you have a
I did. I had a listener pick as well. So Justin sent this link that Eddie Holmes has won the Prime Minister's Prize for Science for work on COVID-19 and viral evolution. And this is from ABC News, but that's Australian news. So this comes from down under. And when I got this email from Justin, it was just when I was listening to the part in Greg's book about Eddie Holmes. So it was very timely how Eddie Holmes was contributed to getting the SARS-CoV-2 sequence released by the Chinese scientist when it was not allowed by the Chinese government at that point. So it was, but anyway, congratulations to him on winning this prize. It's
nice. $250,000.
I love it. This article starts out, when Eddie Holmes was at school in the UK, his biology teacher refused to discuss evolution because he was a creationist. And Eddie says later on in the article, it backfired.
Maybe it pushed him the other way, right? We need to get Eddie on TWiV sometime. It's just the
Wouldn't
time.
that be fun?
The timing is we can't do a 3 p.m. episode with him.
I'll get up in the middle of the night for that.
3 p.m. Eastern in Australia. What time would that be? It's 6 a.m. So if we went a little later, so like 9 a.m., 3 hours, if we started at 6, it would be okay, right?
Maybe we can do it.
I'm gonna write to him and see. That would be fun. All right, that's TWiV 827. Show notes, microbe.tv/TWiV. Send your questions and comments, TWiV at microbe.tv. And if you would like to support our work, microbe.tv/contribute. Dixon Despommiers at Racaniello.org, thelivingriver.com. Thank you, Dixon.
You're very welcome, and always I would want to say always a pleasure, but that's plagiarism. So it's always a good time. Gee, that's plagiarism. I had a good time.
Dixon was here at the incubator last Tuesday, right?
Yeah, that was fun.
No, it was just this past Tuesday, yeah. With Daniel,
Yep.
we recorded TWiP 200.
Wow, TWiP 200. Awesome.
200.
It took many years to get there, but it was fun to be in person because, you know, you
You're right.
can look at people when they're talking. You get different nuances you don't get on Zoom.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, you can see people, right? But it was really fun to be here in person. And
Yeah, good time.
that the video will be coming out this weekend, Dixon, if you want to
Good.
look at yourself. So the three of us have a monitor in front, and we could see Christina Naula from Glasgow on the monitor because she didn't come clearly. So for TWiV 1000, we'll all come here, okay?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Cool.
That would be fun. I got a big table. 96 inches is this table, which you can't see. That's a big table. Is that 8 feet? Yeah,
Yes.
it's 8 feet. I never had a table this big, and the three of us were able to sit behind it, right, Dixon?
Yep.
Okay. Kathy Spindler's at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks. This is a lot of fun.
Rich Condit, Emeritus Professor, University of Florida, Gainesville. He's currently in Austin, Texas. Thank you, Rich.
Sure enough. Always a good time.
It's fun reading about Jason McClelland in the book, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there were a couple other characters I was at least familiar with, at least acquainted with. That was good.
It's always
I enjoyed
fun
that.
to
Good
read things that you don't know about people, right?
Oh, yeah. And there was a lot about the development of these that I didn't know.
Yeah,
That was
for sure.
in this. It was very good.
Yeah, go out and buy it. It's a good book. I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I'd like to thank the American Society for Virology and the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiV, and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.